Hey everyone, thanks for taking the time to watch this supplemental video lesson on the Second Commandment. In class we briefly touched on the 5 different ways that we can break this commandment, and so now in this video lesson we're going to be expounding a little bit more on those ways that we can break the commandment. But before we get into those 5 ways that Luther lists in his explanation to the Second Commandment, there is one other way to misuse God's name that really should be mentioned. And that is when we use God's name in vain. Now, to use something in vain means that there really isn't any purpose or value or even need in using it, that it's just useless and foolish. And the way that we typically use God's name in vain is when we're shocked at something, and we might say, "Oh my God," or "Jesus Christ," or something like that. And for some people even, they get so into the habit of saying those sorts of expressions, like especially "oh my God," that it kind of just rolls off the tongue for them, even in matters that are really not all that shocking. It just becomes a part of their everyday speech. And this is how we can use or really misuse God's name in vain, and we shouldn't be talking like that. So if you're in the habit of saying "oh my God" to things, try to work at and train yourself out of saying that, because that really is a breaking of the Second Commandment. So getting into then part 1, when we use God's name to curse. Now, cursing with God's name means that we're using God's name to wish harm on someone or something. Now keep in mind that God revealed his name to us for 3 purposes: to bless us, protect us, and save us. So without even looking at any of the Bible passages that are listed right there on your packet, or that I'll be reading in a moment, we can really tell that using God's name to curse is just flat out wrong, because that goes against the explicit purpose and intent that God has revealed his name to us, that we have learned. But that said, let's take a look at least one Bible passage on this subject, from James chapter 3. "With our mouth we bless our Lord and Father, and with it we curse people who are made in the likeness of God. Blessing and cursing come out of the same mouth. My brothers, these things should not be this way. A spring does not pour out both fresh and bitter water from the same opening, does it?" And so pretty obviously, we shouldn't use God's name to curse anything. And you might think, okay, well, we don't really do that often, because it's very rare that I would actually, with malice and intent, tell God to damn someone to hell. But we do this a bit more often than what we realize. I mean, just thinking of a quick little illustration, think about that. Maybe you've done this before, that you're in a rush to get somewhere, you get out of the car, you slam the car door shut, and somehow you manage to slam the door shut right on your fingers, and the pain is just coursing through your body, and in a moment of frustration and anger and pain, it's like a release almost, and you just yell out those 3 words, "God D it." And you know what that D word is. Now, really, the only time we should ever use that word damn is when we're talking in a, just a matter-of-fact or dogmatic sort of way about how God damns some people to hell. We should really never be using that word damn to express a wish or a frustration. And so this would be a way of misusing God's name to curse, wishing him to damn someone or something. Part 2, swearing. Now, when we're talking about swearing in God's name, we're not talking about all those dirty swear words that we might say, like the F-bomb or the S-word or things like that. We're talking about using God's name to solemnly promise or swear that we are telling the truth. And so what that means then is that we are calling upon God as our witness. Now, does God forbid all forms of swearing? No. In fact, there are a number of places in the Bible that talk about the swearing of oaths. One example would be when Jesus was standing before the high priest, and the high priest charged him with an oath to tell everyone exactly who Jesus was. And Jesus accepted that oath that he was put under, and he answered it. And so that would show us that, okay, answering or taking of oaths is perfectly acceptable. There's also a number of other Bible passages as well, and we'll take a look at two of them that show us that it is acceptable to swear oaths in the right circumstances. The first one is Ecclesiastes 5, verse 4. When you make a vow, that is, swear an oath to God, do not delay in fulfilling it, for he takes no delight in fools. Fulfill whatever you have vowed. And the second one, Numbers chapter 30, verse 2. When a man makes a vow to the Lord or swears an oath to put himself under an obligation, he must not break his word. He must do everything that has come out of his mouth. So, here in these passages, we see God telling Israel to keep the oaths that they have made. You know, if all swearing of oaths is sinful, as some groups believe, then God really wouldn't be giving them any instructions on keeping their oaths. He'd be saying, hey guys, knock it off. Don't be taking any or making any oaths at all. But God is okay with swearing oaths. It's just that we need to be aware that it's a very serious thing to do. And it's serious because really God is the highest authority and witness that we can call upon, and he doesn't want the value of his witness cheapened or tainted by a lie. The Bible shows us that we can make oaths when we're asked to in front of God's representatives in the home, the church, and the state. Some examples or instances of when we do this are when we get confirmed in church, or when we get married, or when we stand before the pastor or maybe a justice of the peace of the government. We also do it when we are called upon to testify in court. You raise your hand, and at least it used to be that you put your hand on the Bible, left hand on the Bible, and somebody would swear you in. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? And then you say, I do. Pastors and teachers, when they are called to a congregation and they are installed in that congregation, they stand before the church and really they swear an oath or a promise that they are going to be faithful to the office that has been entrusted to them. Now that said, when we swear an oath, we should only be swearing to God and not on our grandmother's grave or anything else like that, just to God. So, again, when is it not proper to swear an oath? Well, there's three basic situations that we shouldn't be swearing oaths for. We're going to take a look at those three right now. The first one, a good example of this, comes from the life of Peter, from Matthew chapter 26. We're not going to read all of those verses there. We're going to select a couple of them, beginning with verse 72. It says, again, Peter denied, that is, knowing Jesus with an oath. And he said, I do not know the man. And then a little bit later on, verse 74, it says, then he began to curse and to swear, again, making an oath, I don't know the man. And just then the rooster crowed. And we know what happened with the rest of that story. So, notice there in verse 74 that it says he began to call down curses on himself, which that'd be wrong to do, misuse of God's name. But he also was swearing that he didn't know Jesus. Well, of course, this was a lie. He had been with Jesus for basically the last 3 years. And so one way to swear falsely is when we are swearing in order to support a lie. Second example, coming from Mark chapter 6, beginning with verse 21. An opportune day came when it was Herod's birthday. He gave a banquet for his nobles, the military officers, and the prominent men of Galilee. When the daughter of Herodias came in and danced, she pleased Herod and his guests. The king said to the girl, ask me whatever you want, and I will give it to you. With an oath he promised her, whatever you ask of me, I will give it to you, up to half of my kingdom. She went out and said to her mother, what should I ask for? Herodias, her mother, said, "The head of John the Baptizer." The girl hurried right back to the king and made her request. "I want you to give me the head of John the Baptist on a platter right now." The king was very sad, but because of his oaths and his dinner guests, he did not want to refuse her. The king sent an executioner at once and ordered him to bring John's head. He went, beheaded John in prison, and brought his head on a platter and gave it to the girl. Then the girl gave it to her mother. So, do you see the problem with the oath that Herod made here? It's not just that he promised to do something that he shouldn't have been doing, murdering an innocent man. It's that he didn't even know what he was swearing to do. His stepdaughter could have asked for half the kingdom, which would have been perfectly legit and acceptable, and it still would have been wrong for Herod to make this oath. And this isn't the only instance in the Bible where this happens. One of the judges of the Old Testament, a guy named Jephthah, he had done something similar. He prayed to God to give him victory over his enemies, and he swore to God that if that happened, the first thing that would come out of his home to greet him when he returned home from battle, he would sacrifice to the Lord. Well, you and me might think, well, that's an insanely stupid idea to do, but in Jephthah's mind, it might have been an animal, because a lot of the livestock were kept indoors overnight and were brought out through the front door. And so Jephthah thought, well, it's going to be an animal. But even then, we still realize just how stupid of an oath this was. And guess what? Out the front door came his one and only child, a daughter. And it seems like Jephthah actually followed through on this oath and sacrificed her. The Bible doesn't explicitly say it, but the way the words kind of dance around the issue a little bit, the writer recognizes the awkwardness and uncomfortableness with what was happening there, and seems to suggest, okay, he actually did follow through with his oath. Now this principle here of not promising to swear something that we don't know what we would be swearing to do is something that can actually get some people upset. And because I remember one time years ago that there was this man who wanted me to swear that I wouldn't do anything or say anything about to anyone about what he was about to tell me. Well, I told him that I couldn't in good conscience make that oath because I didn't know what he was swearing me to keep secret. For all I knew, it could be something that about a person who was in harm or in danger, and then I'd have to keep that to myself. I wouldn't be able to. But he got upset with me about that, and not that I believed that he was going to tell me to do anything that was wrong, but I understood the biblical principle here that we are learning, that it would be wrong to make such a promise, because that's what the Bible teaches us. The third basic way that we can swear falsely, or when we shouldn't be, is from Matthew chapter 5, verses 33 to 37. There Jesus says, "Again you have heard that it was said to people long ago, 'Do not break your oaths, but fulfill your vows to the Lord.' But I tell you, do not swear at all, not by heaven, because it is God's throne, and not by earth, because it is his footstool, and not by Jerusalem, because it is the city of the great king. And do not swear by your own head, since you cannot make one hair white or black." Just to pause there for a moment, when Jesus says don't swear at all, he's not actually meaning that we don't swear in any circumstance whatsoever. Got to keep in mind the context of what Jesus is talking about here, the situations that he is addressing. He's talking about those everyday situations that come along where we tell somebody what we saw or heard, and they might challenge us, like, "Nah, I don't believe you." And we might want to say, "No, seriously, I swear it's true." Well, are you doing that before God's authorities? Are any of God's authorities calling upon you, charging you under oath to testify in an important matter? No, they're not. In fact, this really isn't an important matter. This is what we would call a trivial or everyday matter. And in those cases, what Jesus says then in verse 37 should be the principle that we follow. That let your statement be yes, yes, or no, no. Whatever goes beyond these is from the evil one. So Jesus is just saying, don't get into the habit of pulling out that I swear card for every little thing, that you say, as if people are not going to believe you, that they just need to take you at your word. Especially if you are a generally trustworthy and reliable person, they should take you at your word. If you're not a trustworthy, reliable person, if you have a reputation of lying, well, that's kind of your fault. If people don't believe you when you're actually telling the truth, then maybe you need to be a little bit more honest. But if you are a trustworthy person and they choose not to believe you, that's on them. And you commit that matter to God and leave it in God's hands. But the problem here, earlier we heard God doesn't want the value of his witness cheapened or tainted by a lie. Now, he doesn't want the value of his witness to be tainted or cheapened by overuse. You know how it is when you got like a really popular song that everybody loves, and it comes out, and when it first comes out, everybody's loving it. The radio stations play it over and over and over and over again. Well, eventually people get sick of it because they hear it so often, and they're tired of it. They want to move on to something else. Well, kind of the same thing with God and the value of his witness and swearing those things in such trivial matters. Before we move on to the next part here, I should maybe at least address the wording of Luther's explanation, because when it says that we should fear and love God, that we do not use God's name to curse, swear, and so on, well, it makes it sound like Luther's saying all forms of swearing. Well, I think that what we need to is helpful here to remember is that Luther was just trying to be concise and give us something that was quick and easy to learn. And so he didn't want to say curse, swear to support a lie, swear when we don't know what we're swearing to do, swear when it's trivial, just swear. He could have maybe said curse, swear falsely, and then lie or deceive, but he chose just to keep it as simple as possible. So that's what the Bible has to say about the swearing of oaths. Moving on then to part 3, lying in God's name. A couple of passages there from Jeremiah. First of all, from chapter 23. Indeed, I am against the prophets, declares the Lord, who use their own tongues to say, this is what the Lord declares. And then again, Jeremiah 14, verse 14. Then the Lord said this to me, those prophets are prophesying lies in my name, but I did not send them. I did not command them, and I did not speak to them. They are prophesying a false vision to you and providing worthless omens, something from their own imagination. So what does God mean in that first passage, the one in chapter 23? Well, think of it this way. Let's say that somebody is going around school spreading a nasty rumor about you, and they're saying, for instance, that you called somebody or a group of people a really nasty word. And let's say then that the people they're telling this to believe it. And how do you think that would make you feel, especially if people were believing it and now starting to gang up on you? Well, something like that actually happened once to me at a new school I went to, and wow, I can't tell you just how upset and hurt I was by that. And so I think you can understand then why God would feel this way, why he was against people who were telling other people things and then saying, well, this is what God says. Because they were teaching and claiming things that came from God when they didn't come from God. And so again, we can understand why God would be upset if they're saying those things that God didn't say and then claiming that they did come from God. That is using God's name to support a lie. The same thing goes with the verse or chapter 14 passage. And there I would say it's a bit more explicit, isn't it? That God accuses them of prophesying lies in his name. And so again, that means that they were claiming that the things they were saying had come from God, but it wasn't true. And they knew that it wasn't true. And we might not think that, okay, we really do this that often, but it happens more often than what we think. A lot of Christians, even people in our own churches, pick up on stuff that they hear out there in the world, on the internet, on social media, and because it might sound like it has a spiritual ring to it, they think, wow, that must come from God, and they begin saying it and claiming that this is spiritual, godly stuff. A couple of examples of this would be the common phrase, God helps those who help themselves. And, well, no, God never said that. Another one would be one that I actually just heard the day before I recorded this video. Granted, the person who was saying it isn't somebody who believes it, but he was saying it because it is a common thing that Christians often say. And that is this, that God won't give you more than you can handle. You've probably heard that before. But again, God never said that. In fact, God has said the opposite. Through the Apostle Paul, Paul said that God had given them more than what they could handle. But he does this so that we rely on him and not on ourselves. Or somebody might even say that God says, judge not, lest ye be judged. And they might even say it in that old King James-ish sort of English just to make it sound more authoritative. And it is kind of true that God kind of does say, don't judge, otherwise you will be judged. But it's not taking into context the whole section there in which that statement occurs in Matthew chapter 7, because when you look at Matthew chapter 7, it's very clear that yes, God tells us to judge the actions and the words and whatnot of people. I mean, if you couldn't judge right or wrong, you wouldn't be able to parent your children. You wouldn't be able to say that that's good or that's evil. And so, again, judge not lest ye be judged is kind of true, but it's also a lie. Because what God is really saying is, don't judge with a judgmental or a self-righteous attitude that looks down on others and thinks, okay, I am above this judgment, or I have never broken this particular command. So that is misusing God's name to lie. The next one, part 4, very close in association to it, is using God's name to deceive. Again, like I said, very similar to lying in God's name. But whereas lying in God's name is used to support some teaching or decree that allegedly came from God but didn't, deceiving in God's name has a different goal. A couple of passages, both from Matthew. First of all, Matthew 15, verses 7 and 8. There Jesus says, hypocrites! Isaiah was right when he prophesied about you. These people honor me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. And then Matthew 23, beginning with verse 27. Woe to you, experts in the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You are like whitewashed tombs that appear beautiful on the outside, but on the inside are full of dead man's bones and every kind of uncleanness. In the same way, on the outside you seem righteous to people, but on the inside you are full of hypocrisy and wickedness. Now, in both of these passages, we see Jesus talking about people who were putting on a good show. That they made themselves look like they were very religious and very godly by the things that they were saying and doing. In fact, they even did such a good job of it that they tricked themselves into believing their own deception. Because really that's all it was. It was all a deception, a show. That those outward things they said and did only covered up the unbelief in their hearts. And Jesus, being God, was able to look into their hearts and expose the hypocrisy going on. You know, as a pastor, I've had a lot of people over the years who have tried to impress me by saying all sorts of good things about, how they intend to get back into church or how they are doing the right thing. I think of one family from my former call, that every time I saw them, oh, Pastor, we've been talking and we're going to be getting back to church. We're going to be coming to church. You're going to see us in church more often. They did this for at least like 10 years of my ministry at this, my 15 years of my ministry at the former congregation, and they never showed up, other than maybe on the most rare occasion for a Christmas or an Easter sermon. There was no sincerity there. I don't know why they do that, if they are feeling guilty and my presence makes them feel guilty or uncomfortable, if they just want to put on a good show so that I'm impressed with them. I really don't know why people do this, but the point being is that it amounts to just a little more than a flash in the pan, that they don't follow through with these things that they say they're doing. They're just putting on a good show for me, and well, that's what it means to deceive in God's name. The last one that Luther mentions in his explanation, part 5, is using God's name superstitiously. And I want to stick with superstitiously and not use what you learned in your catechisms, the word witchcraft, because witchcraft is much more narrow than superstitious, which is much broader in its understanding. A couple of passages, first of all from Deuteronomy 18. Let no one be found among you who makes his son or his daughter pass through the fire, or who uses divination, or who engages in fortune telling, or who observes omens, or who practices witchcraft, or who casts a magic spell, or who consults a ghost or a familiar spirit, or who inquires of the dead. Anyone doing these things is detestable to the Lord, and because of these abominations, the Lord your God is driving them out before you. And then Leviticus 19, verse 31. You must not turn to mediums or to spiritists, and so become unclean through them. I am the Lord your God, the Lord says. So God lists a number of things not to do here. First of all, divination. And divination is the practice of attempting to tell the future or discover hidden things by either the occult or other supernatural means. Then you've got fortune telling. You've got observing omens. And omens are anything that's believed to foreshadow a good or evil event or circumstance in the future. Practicing witchcraft, and so there's the more narrow focus there on witchcraft. Spell casting, anyone who consults a medium or a spiritist. And mediums or spiritists are people that you can go to who claim that they're speaking with the dead. Maybe some of them are just frauds trying to get some money out of you. Some of them, they might be legit, that they are consulting, and not necessarily with a dead spirit, but really with a demon or even the devil who is masquerading or pretending to be that particular spirit. Or maybe, let's say you don't even want to go to a medium or a spiritist, you bypass those people and you directly attempt to consult with the dead or the devil or a demon. Well, there's a number of things wrong with this, a number of dangers as well that come along with it. First of all, what makes this wrong is that it's seeking help or answers from the devil and his demons, or even from the dead. As far as both of those are concerned, remember what God says in Psalm 50, verse 15, that he wants us to call upon him in the day of trouble. That God is our helper, not the devil. The Bible calls God our helper. And if it's wrong to go to the devil directly for help, it's also wrong to seek or help or answers from someone who does things by the power of the devil. And plus, think about this. Do you really want to seek help or answers from someone whose name is devil, which means liar? That everything that he says is a lie or meant to mislead us or deceive us? I know I wouldn't. And as for trying to consult the dead, there's another really good Bible passage. Comes from Isaiah chapter 8, verse 20, which says, to the law and to the testimony. In other words, go to God's word. If people do not speak according to this word, there will be no dawn for them. The point is that really it's useless to consult the dead because they have no idea what's going on in this life. They have no real way of helping us. And even more so, why it'd be foolish to consult the dead. We got the word of the living God. God versus the dead. The Almighty versus the ones who have no power over death. Go to God is the point. And what makes this so dangerous, as I said, is that we're not putting our faith in God. Instead, we're putting our faith in the devil when we do these things. And second of all, doing these things, another problem, a dangerous problem with this is that it can become very, very addictive to the point where it gets hard to get out of it. So bear those thoughts in mind. A couple of questions here, examples. Let's say, number one, a medium, that is a person who allegedly communicates with the dead, is in town and putting on a public show. Tickets are for sale. So purely for entertainment value, is this something that you should go to, and why or why not? Well, the correct answer is that you should absolutely stay away. And there's a few reasons why. First of all, the first reason is that you would be supporting their wicked work financially. And even if it's just for entertainment value, that's not something that we should be doing. Second of all, we'd potentially be seeking answers from sources we shouldn't be going to. And last of all, we might become fascinated with it to the point where we begin dabbling more into the occult, because there is a natural curiosity factor for us in these things. If you need a moment, feel free to pause the video and write down your answers. Otherwise, we will continue with the next slide and the next question. Is it wrong to play Dungeons and Dragons, or read Harry Potter, or watch the Harry Potter movies? Again, why or why not? Well, it's not wrong to play those games or read those books or watch those movies. And the reason for that is this. No one is claiming that these things are real and true. I mean, we know that they're fantasy, they're fiction. And plus, they're not necessarily teaching us anything that we shouldn't be learning either. And so, obviously, you might need to exercise a little bit of discretion, understandable, but you can still watch these things or do these things with a clean conscience. One practical example, though, of the occult practices that we should mention is what's called tarot cards. T-A-R-O-T. Tarot cards, depending on whom you ask, is a deck of 78 cards that are supposed to represent life's karmic and spiritual lessons and reflect the trials and tribulations we experience on a daily basis. Of course, we don't believe in the existence or presence of karma, so that right there tells you, okay, there's something a little off here. But some claim that these tarot cards are a mirror to our souls and the key to inner wisdom. And so those who use tarot cards say that they can teach us spiritual lessons to help us live inspired lives. Well, that alone should tell us all that we need to know about tarot cards, that they set themselves up in opposition to the Bible and to God. However, in August of 2021, I read a recent report about a study which says that 51% of those ages 13 to 25 engage in tarot cards or fortune telling. 51% of those in your age range. Now of that, 17% practice daily, 25% once a week, 27% once a month, and about a third less than once a month. And so this, you can see then that this is a growing concern and something for us to be mindful of and to avoid. One other particular area of curiosity, especially for kids and teenagers, and you may have heard it before, if not, that's good. Either way, I'm going to tell you about it because it is something you need to be aware of, is a game called the Ouija board, spelled O-U-I-J-A. And I want to spend some time talking about the dangers of that because it is such a curiosity piece. And also because you can pretty much easily buy it at any store that sells board games. I mean, you could go to Walmart right now or Target and probably find it on the shelves. Well, I want to read use something from a book called Wizards That Peep, A Journey into the Occult. It was written by a former Wisconsin Lutheran Seminary professor. His name was Sigbert Becker. Siggy died several decades ago, but he took it upon himself to study the occult so that he could write this book, which would be a wellspring of information and knowledge for future generations. Well, after he finished writing it, he said that his research into the occult really took a serious spiritual toll on him, that it really hurt his faith. And because of that, I've never read the book cover to cover, even though I own it. And I never plan on reading it all the way through. In fact, all I have read is the section that I'm going to be reading to you shortly regarding the Ouija board. But anyway, here's what he had to write about that. Probably one of the best known and most common spiritistic tools is the Ouija board, which was invented a little less than a century ago from the first printing of Wizards That Peep back in 1978, and is now marketed by Parker Brothers. The Ouija board is at the present time outselling the popular game of Monopoly. This so-called toy, which also many Christians use as an amusement device, is, according to many observers, actually very dangerous. It consists of a smooth board on which are printed the letters of the alphabet and the words yes, no, and goodbye. The board takes its name from the word yes in French, which is oui, O-U-I, and as it's spelled in English, and the German yes, which is ja, J-A. A small three-legged pointer or planchet is used with the board. Two people sit at the board with their fingers lightly touching the planchet, which moves until it points to one of the words or to individual letters in order to spell out other words. It may be true at times the planchet moves because one or both of the operators are pushing it subconsciously, and that some of the remarkable answers given can be explained by telepathy. Well, telepathic communication, there's been no scientific proof of that. I think Professor Becker here is being a little bit charitable in offering other, I don't even want to call it plausible explanations. But anyway, he said it. But this can hardly be the whole story. One competent observer states that in one experiment with an Ouija board, the answers were spelled out at a high speed when the operators of the board had their eyes blindfolded. A board was used in which the letters could be moved. When the letters were shifted around, the planchet moved more slowly, but it continued to spell out messages correctly and gradually regained its speed. Such experiments seem to indicate that there are at times other forces at work than the subconscious mind of the persons using the board. John Stafford Wright says that even if that which emerges is the product of their own minds, experience shows that what emerges soon becomes a conglomeration of evil, even if it starts apparently harmlessly. We've already noted that Mr. David Farron began to hear voices while using the board. This is not at all a unique experience, since the same thing has happened in other cases. Its use has reportedly led to devil possession, and not only theologians, but also psychiatrists and medical doctors, and even spiritualists warn against its use. The passive state of mind required for its successful employment is a typical prerequisite for the invasion of the mind by alien spirit powers. And by alien, we're not talking about, those from outer space. We're talking alien in the sense of foreign or external spiritual powers, namely the devil and his demons. And if that quote there is not enough to let you know that there are other powers at play behind the Ouija board that we shouldn't be playing with, I'm going to share one more story with you that comes directly from a member at my former congregation. Now, this happened way back when she was just 9 years old, and she was playing with an Ouija board with a couple older sisters and a sister-in-law. But she said that the board spelled out the words, "See man run." And this is what she told me next. And these are her exact words. Well, right after we got a call from the neighbor lady who was like late 80s, And she said a man tried to get into her home, but she was able to shut the door on him. Just as the phone call came, we looked out the window and saw a man running down the railroad tracks away from our house. Coincidence? Maybe, but I will never touch that board again. We stopped playing with it. Good move. Now, to be fair to this poor little 9-year-old girl at the time, she probably didn't know anything about an Ouija board or what made it dangerous or anything like that. Its connections to demons and the devil, and so we really can't fault her for this. But for us who do know, it would not be right to play with the board itself, and we really would even be doing ourselves a beneficial service if we avoided or abstained from watching that movie called Ouija that came out back in 2014, I believe. So these stories I share with you just enough to let you know that yes, there is real power behind the occult. It's not as though the devil lost all of his powers to do things and influence things in this world back in Bible times. He still has those and he still uses them. But it's not something that we want to get involved in, even as a matter of satisfying our curiosity. So that's all that I have for today. Just to wrap things up, keep in mind that God's name is something very special. And it's wonderful that he reveals it to us and reveals it to us in such a way to bring good things to us. And I pray that you've learned something about God's name that will help you to speak it in ways that give God's name its appropriate honor and respect. With that, I'll say see you later. See you in class. God bless.